The avoidant person's withdrawal after hurting you appears on the surface to be indifference or evidence that they never really cared. They create distance. They stop reaching out. They become cold or unreachable. And this behavior seems to confirm that you didn't matter to them, or that their capacity to hurt you without remorse reveals the shallowness of their feelings. But beneath this appearance of indifference lies a more complex and painful reality. The avoidant person is keeping distance precisely because they hurt you, because they're aware of the harm they caused, and because their shame and guilt about that harm are so overwhelming that they cannot face you or the relationship. The distance is not what they want. It's what their defensive system is compelling them to create as protection against the intolerable emotional experience of confronting their impact on someone they care about. The avoidant person is caught in a cruel psychological trap where their awareness of having hurt you triggers such intense shame that they can only manage that shame through withdrawal. But the withdrawal itself causes additional hurt and confirms to you that they don't care, when the truth is that their shame proves they do care, but lack the emotional capacity to sit with that caring and the guilt it creates when they've caused harm. Understanding this dynamic doesn't excuse the avoidance behavior or mean you should accept their distance as an acceptable response to hurting you, but it illuminates the mechanism that drives their withdrawal after causing harm and reveals why their distance often increases rather than decreases after they've hurt you most deeply. The avoidant person wants to repair, wants to apologize, wants to restore connection, but they're trapped by shame that tells them they don't deserve forgiveness, by fear that facing you means facing the full weight of what they've done, by belief that you're better off without them, and by the same defensive patterns that caused them to hurt you in the first place, now preventing them from taking the vulnerable steps that repair would require. The shame that drives them further away after hurting you. The primary emotion driving the avoidant person's withdrawal after hurting you is shame, a feeling so intense and destabilizing for them that it triggers their strongest defensive responses. Understanding the specific nature of this shame, how it operates in the avoidant person's psychology, and why it compels distance rather than repair, reveals both the depth of their internal struggle and the dysfunction of their coping mechanisms. Shame, distinct from guilt, is not just feeling bad about what you did, but feeling that what you did reveals something fundamentally wrong or unacceptable about who you are. When the avoidant person recognizes they've hurt you, they don't just feel guilty about their specific actions. They experience shame that confirms their deepest fear that they are fundamentally flawed, unworthy of love, incapable of being a good partner, destined to hurt people who care about them. This shame activates the core wound that underlies their avoidant attachment. The wound formed in childhood when they learned that their needs were burdensome, that their authentic self was unacceptable, that they had to be perfect and self-sufficient to be worthy of care. The avoidant person's shame is particularly intense because hurting you contradicts the identity they've constructed around being a good person, being in control, being rational and reasonable. Many avoidants pride themselves on their integrity, their fairness, their ability to handle things maturely. When they recognize they've behaved in ways that hurt someone, when they see the pain they've caused through their withdrawal or inconsistency or emotional unavailability, this recognition shatters their self-image. They cannot reconcile their self-concept as a good person with the evidence that they've caused genuine harm to someone who trusted them. This cognitive dissonance creates intense psychological discomfort that the avoidance defensive system immediately moves to resolve. The resolution that the avoidant person's system chooses is not to sit with the shame, process it, take responsibility, and repair the harm. That path would require emotional vulnerability and distress tolerance that the avoidant person lacks. Instead, their system resolves the discomfort through withdrawal and distance that physically removes them from the source of shame, from having to see the hurt in your eyes, from having to confront what they've done, from having to feel the full weight of their impact. The distance allows them to suppress the shame, to avoid the painful feelings that facing you would trigger, to protect themselves from the vulnerability that repair would require. This shame-driven withdrawal manifests in specific behaviors that intensify after the avoidant person has hurt you. They stop initiating contact completely, unable to reach out because doing so would require acknowledging what happened and their role in it. They respond minimally or not at all if you reach out, unable to engage because engagement means facing the shame they're trying to escape. They avoid places or situations where they might encounter you, protecting themselves from having to see you and be reminded of what they've done. They might even become cold or distant in ways that seem cruel, using that coldness as a shield against their own shame rather than as a true expression of indifference. The avoidant person's shame also drives them to rewrite the narrative about what happened in ways that protect their ego and reduce their discomfort. They focus on what you did wrong or how you contributed to the problems, shifting some of the responsibility away from themselves. They minimize the harm they caused, telling themselves it wasn't that bad or that you're too sensitive. They convince themselves that the relationship was doomed anyway, that you were incompatible, that ending or creating distance was inevitable, and therefore their specific hurtful behaviors were just part of that inevitable trajectory rather than choices they made that caused unnecessary pain. All of these reframings serve to manage their shame by reducing their sense of responsibility or the severity of their actions. The intensity of the avoidant person's shame is also connected to how much they actually care about you. If they didn't care, if you didn't matter to them, hurting you wouldn't trigger significant shame because your pain wouldn't matter to them. But when they care about you, when you're important to them, even if they struggle to show it, knowing they hurt you is devastating to them. The more they care, the more shameful it feels to have caused you pain, and therefore, the more intensely they need to distance themselves from that shame. This creates a tragic paradox where the people who matter most to the avoidant, the people whose pain would hurt them most to have caused, are the people they most need to distance themselves from after causing harm. The avoidant person's shame is compounded by their recognition at some level that their hurtful behavior resulted from their own patterns and limitations rather than from anything you did to deserve it. They might have withdrawn when you needed them, become cold when you expressed vulnerability, ended things or created distance when the relationship was actually going well, or sabotaged the connection through their defensive patterns. On some level, they know that you didn't do anything to warrant being hurt this way, that you were showing up with good faith and genuine care, and that they hurt you anyway because of their own inability to handle intimacy. This recognition that you were an innocent victim of their dysfunction intensifies their shame because they cannot even blame you to reduce their own responsibility. The shame the avoidant person feels also includes shame about the withdrawal itself. They know at some level that the mature, healthy response to hurting someone would be to apologize, to take responsibility, to try to repair the harm. They know that withdrawing and creating distance is making things worse, is causing additional hurt, is proving that their patterns are exactly as dysfunctional as they fear. This awareness creates additional shame about their response to the original harm. Shame about shame, creating a spiral that makes the withdrawal more entrenched. They're ashamed of hurting you, and they're ashamed of their inability to face that hurt and repair it. And both layers of shame drive them further into protective distance. Why? They believe distance is protecting you from more harm. Alongside the shame that drives their withdrawal, the avoidant person also operates with a genuine, if misguided, belief that maintaining distance is protecting you from additional harm that they believe they would inevitably cause if they remain close or try to repair the relationship. This protective motivation is not conscious manipulation or convenient excuse. It's a sincere belief rooted in their deep conviction that they are fundamentally incapable of being a good partner, and that the kindest thing they can do for you is to remove themselves from your life before they hurt you more. Understanding this protective impulse and the distorted beliefs that drive it reveals both the avoidant person's genuine care for you and the dysfunction of their thinking about relationships and harm. The avoidant person has absorbed through years of repeating their patterns and seeing the hurt those patterns cause the belief that they are fundamentally damaged in ways that make them unable to sustain healthy relationships. They've recognized that they consistently hurt people who get close to them, that their patterns of withdrawal and emotional unavailability cause pain, that they cannot provide the consistency and presence their partners need and deserve. This recognition, rather than motivating them to change through therapy and sustained work, instead calcifies into a belief that they cannot change, that they are permanently limited, that anyone who gets close to them will eventually be hurt by their limitations. This belief is deeply pessimistic and often inaccurate, but it feels true to the avoidant person based on their history and their lack of awareness that change is possible with appropriate help and commitment. Operating from this belief that they will inevitably hurt anyone who gets close to them, the avoidant person concludes that the most caring thing they can do is to maintain distance and prevent further harm. They tell themselves they're protecting you by staying away, that their absence is a gift that spares you from the additional pain their continued presence would cause. They imagine that if they tried to repair and reconnect, they would just repeat their patterns, hurt you again, create more damage than already exists. They believe that ending things cleanly or maintaining firm distance, while painful in the short term, is actually the kind of choice that prevents the extended suffering you would experience if you remained entangled with someone as dysfunctional as they believe themselves to be. This protective distancing is particularly strong if the avoidant person has hurt you through specific actions that revealed their limitations in ways they cannot deny. Perhaps they withdrew when you needed them during a crisis, failing to show up when you were vulnerable and needed support. Perhaps they ended things abruptly when the relationship was deepening, unable to handle the increasing intimacy. Perhaps they betrayed your trust through their actions or their dishonesty about their feelings or intentions. Whatever the specific harm, if it clearly demonstrated their incapacity or their defensive patterns, the avoidant person uses this evidence to confirm that they're not capable of being a good partner and that you deserve better than what they can provide. The avoidant person's protective distancing also stems from their belief that you will be better off without them, that you should find someone who can meet your needs in ways they cannot. They tell themselves that you deserve a partner who can be emotionally available, who can commit without ambivalence, who can provide consistency and presence, who won't hurt you through withdrawal and distance. They recognize accurately that they currently cannot provide these things, and they believe less accurately that they never will be able to. This belief leads them to conclude that the loving thing to do is to let you go completely so you can find the healthy relationship you deserve rather than wasting more time with them. This "you deserve better" narrative is partially a genuine recognition of your worth and partially a defensive rationalization. The avoidant person does recognize your value and does believe you deserve good treatment, but they're also using this narrative to avoid the discomfort and vulnerability that staying and doing repair work would require. It's easier to frame their departure as a selfless gift to you than to acknowledge it's primarily about protecting themselves from shame and from the work of change. The narrative allows them to feel noble or self-sacrificing rather than avoidant and limited, protecting their ego while justifying their continued distance. The avoidant person also believes that their presence would prevent you from healing and moving forward. They imagine that as long as they're in your life, even peripherally, you'll remain stuck, hoping for reconciliation, unable to fully process the loss and open yourself to new possibilities. They tell themselves that complete absence is necessary for your healing, that you need them to be completely gone so you can grieve and move on. This belief conveniently aligns with their own need for distance and their inability to maintain connection while you process hurt they caused, but they frame it as being about your needs rather than about their limitations. The protective distancing intensifies if the avoidant person believes that reconnecting would just recreate the same painful dynamics. They fear that if they apologize and try to repair, if they reconnect and attempt to rebuild the relationship, they'll just fall into the same patterns. They'll get close and then need distance. They'll feel trapped and withdraw. They'll hurt you again in the same ways. This fear of repetition makes staying away seem safer for both of you, preventing the cycle from starting again and preventing you from experiencing additional hurt that they believe would be inevitable if they gave the relationship another chance. The avoidant person's protective distancing is also influenced by their fear that you hate them or could never forgive them. They imagine that if they tried to reach out, you would reject them angrily, tell them how much they hurt you, refuse to hear their apology. This imagined rejection is so painful and shame-inducing that they protect themselves from it by not reaching out at all. They tell themselves they're protecting you from the burden of having to deal with their attempt at contact or apology, but they're primarily protecting themselves from the vulnerability of reaching out and potentially being rejected or having to face the full extent of your hurt and anger, the internal war between what they want and what they think you deserve. The avoidant person's withdrawal after hurting you is not a simple expression of their desires, but rather the result of an internal conflict between competing feelings, needs, and beliefs that create paralysis and distance, even when distance is not what they actually want. Understanding this internal war illuminates both the complexity of their experience and the dysfunction of their inability to resolve the conflict in ways that serve both their needs and yours. On one side of this internal war is what the avoidant person actually wants: to repair the relationship, to apologize and be forgiven, to restore connection with you, to not lose someone who matters to them despite their patterns and their difficulties with intimacy. The avoidant person does have attachment needs and does form genuine bonds. When they've hurt you and create distance, part of them desperately wants to close that distance, to make things right, to have you back in their life. They miss you. They think about you. They regret what happened. They wish they could go back and handle things differently. They want to reach out, but feel they cannot. This wanting is often more intense than the avoidant person can acknowledge, even to themselves. They've learned to suppress awareness of their needs and desires, to minimize their attachment to others, to convince themselves they don't need or want connection as much as they actually do. But underneath the suppression, the wanting exists. They want your forgiveness. They want to hear your voice. They want to see you. They want to explain themselves or to apologize or to simply reconnect without having to process what happened. This wanting creates pain and longing that the avoidant person struggles to manage, adding to their discomfort and their desire to suppress awareness of these feelings. On the other side of the internal war is what the avoidant person believes you deserve: someone better than them, someone who can show up consistently, someone who won't hurt you through their patterns, someone who has the capacity for the intimacy and commitment that you need and want. This belief that you deserve better is both sincere and defensive. Sincerely, they recognize your value and they recognize their own limitations, and they conclude that the match between your value and their limitations means you should be with someone else. Defensively, this belief protects them from having to do the difficult work of change, from having to face you and repair the harm, from having to be vulnerable about how much they want you despite believing they can't be good for you. This internal conflict creates paralysis, where the avoidant person cannot move toward you because they believe you deserve better, but they also cannot fully move on because they don't actually want to lose you. They remain stuck in the distance they've created, unable to close it, but also unable to increase it to the point of genuine ending and moving forward. This stuck position is painful for them, though they typically don't express this pain or reach out for support in managing it. They suffer in silence with the conflict. And this silent suffering is part of why they believe they should stay away from you, because they see their suffering as evidence of their dysfunction rather than as evidence that they miss you and want reconnection. The internal war is also fought between the avoidant person's recognition that they hurt you and their desire to minimize or rationalize that hurt to protect their ego. Part of them knows fully what they did and the impact it had. They're aware they hurt you badly, that you're probably in pain, that you deserve better treatment. But another part wants to minimize this awareness because fully feeling their impact is too overwhelming. So they oscillate between moments of clear recognition of the harm they caused and moments of defensive minimization where they tell themselves it wasn't that bad, you'll be fine, you probably didn't care that much anyway, the relationship wasn't working anyway. This oscillation creates additional internal chaos and prevents them from taking consistent action, either toward repair or toward a complete ending. The avoidant person's internal war also includes conflict between wanting to apologize and fearing that apology would not be welcome or adequate. They want to express their regret, to acknowledge what they did wrong, to tell you they're sorry, but they fear that reaching out would hurt you more, that you don't want to hear from them, that their apology would be rejected or would be too little too late. They imagine various scenarios of how their attempt at apology might go wrong. You might be angry and tell them how much they hurt you, which they fear they cannot handle. You might dismiss their apology as insincere or insufficient. You might accept the apology but not want to reconnect, leaving them to deal with the finality of loss without the protective distance they've been maintaining. All of these feared outcomes make apology feel too risky, so they remain silent even though they want to apologize. The internal war is further complicated by the avoidant person's awareness that time is passing and that the longer they wait, the harder repair becomes and the more likely it is that you've moved on. They know that their distance is creating a widening gap, that you might be healing and moving forward in ways that make you less available to them, even if they did eventually reach out. This awareness creates urgency to act. But the urgency is overwhelmed by the shame, fear, and belief that they shouldn't reach out because you deserve better. So they watch time pass while internally agonizing about whether to reach out, what to say, whether it's too late, whether they should just let it go, whether you even want to hear from them. The avoidant person also experiences internal conflict between their defensive patterns, telling them to maintain distance and protect themselves, and their attachment system telling them that losing you is painful and that they should fight for the relationship. Their defensive system is strong and has years or decades of reinforcement. It's telling them that vulnerability is dangerous, that facing you means facing shame they cannot handle, that distance is safety, that they should protect themselves by staying away. But their attachment system, despite being suppressed and denied, is still active and is signaling that losing you matters, that this loss is painful, that they should try to repair and reconnect. These competing internal voices create an exhausting internal battle that the avoidant person typically resolves by siding with the defensive system, because it's more familiar and because choosing vulnerability and repair would require going against patterns they've relied on their entire life. What would actually need to happen for them to close the distance? Understanding what the avoidant person is experiencing internally, the shame and fear and internal conflict that keeps them distant, even though distance is not what they want, leads to the crucial question: what would actually need to happen for them to close the distance, to reach out, to attempt repair? The answer reveals both the psychological and practical requirements for the avoidant person to overcome their paralysis and move toward reconnection, and illuminates why such movement is rare even when the avoidant person genuinely wants it. The first requirement is that the avoidant person would need to develop the capacity to tolerate shame and guilt, rather than fleeing from these emotions through distance and avoidance. The shame that drives their withdrawal is not going to disappear. If they reach out, if they face you, if they attempt repair, they will have to sit with the full weight of their shame about hurting you and their guilt about their behavior. This emotional experience is intensely uncomfortable, and the avoidant person's entire defensive structure is designed to avoid uncomfortable emotions. For them to close the distance, they would need to consciously choose to experience discomfort rather than to continue avoiding it, and they would need tools and support for managing that discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. This capacity to tolerate difficult emotions typically requires therapeutic support. The avoidant person would need to be working with a therapist who can help them build distress tolerance skills, who can provide support as they sit with shame and guilt, who can help them process these emotions rather than suppressing them. Without this support, most avoidants cannot sustain the discomfort long enough to move through it toward repair. They start to reach out, feel the shame intensify, and retreat back into protective distance. Having a therapist or support system that normalizes difficult emotions and provides strategies for managing them is often necessary for the avoidant person to push through their discomfort toward repair. The second requirement is that the avoidant person would need to believe that repair is possible, that you might be willing to hear them, that attempting to reach out wouldn't result in the rejection or anger they fear. This belief doesn't require certainty of a positive outcome, but it does require enough hope that reaching out could be received reasonably to outweigh their fear of a negative outcome. If the avoidant person is certain you hate them, won't forgive them, don't want to hear from them, they won't reach out. They need some sign either from you directly or from their assessment of your character and the relationship you had that you're not completely closed off to hearing from them. This creates a difficult dynamic because you might reasonably be very angry or hurt and might communicate or demonstrate that anger in ways that confirm the avoidant person's fears that reaching out wouldn't be welcome. But if you're completely unreachable, if you've blocked them entirely, or if you've communicated absolute finality, the avoidant person is unlikely to push through their fear to reach out. There's a narrow window where you're clearly hurt and possibly angry, but not completely closed off, where the avoidant person might believe reaching out is possible, even if difficult. This window often closes relatively quickly as you heal and move forward, which is part of why avoidant people who want to repair often wait too long and miss their opportunity.